Gartner released their annual research claiming that in 2 years' time, 70% of the top 2,000 organisations worldwide will be using a gamified system. They typically use this hype cycle to evaluate where people are. You may have seen it before. And that's quite a good judge of where we are. Now, so gamification as a term has really taken hold this year. Gamification as a concept for marketing and applying simplified game mechanics to elements, so for example the McDonald's Monopoly game, the Starbucks game, Foursquare, things like that, are just coming into the market. The market's being flooded with applications and we're just kind of seeing where it could be used right now. I'd argue, now Gartner don't put serious games on their hype cycle. I've taken the liberty of putting that on myself. But I would argue that serious games is actually just reaching the tipping point. More and more organisations are using them and we're just reaching again that critical mass where again people are going to start talking about them and they're going to become a more accepted form of training. Serious gaming again is a very, very varied field and they're not all good. There are some really bad examples of serious games out there. So to keep the growth around serious games and to make sure that we keep producing good ones, we need to watch out for a few enemies or a few traps that we may fall into when designing our serious games. Very often we get an RFP in, our clients, they want to put something out there that's very innovative, very new, that's going to challenge people. But when you get down to it, they just have their training objective and they just want to tick in the box. And they just want a training course that looks a bit like a game that might get their boss excited, for example. And perhaps a bit of a controversial statement that if you're working with organisations that are like that, perhaps you shouldn't start with a game. It might not be the first area. I personally think there needs to be a shift in the whole of learning and development. It's quite an ambitious statement. But I think innovation is a challenge for a lot of people. There is a fear of risk, especially in this current economic climate. People don't want to try something new. How do we really know it's going to work? Is it really such a big risk? And I would argue that it's not really that big a risk for most organisations out there, because a good serious game, a well-designed serious game, applies what we call the laws of learning. So any learning and development manager out there will have a good idea about how people learn, what are the good principles behind learning, what's the most optimal environment, how long should people spend in learning. Well, that's quite common knowledge. What people don't really understand is that all of that methodology is applied to serious games. It's the same. But it wraps it up in a really exciting, motivating blend, and it mixes in story and character and rewards, and it takes it one step further, is that we need to start to rewrite the return on investment equation. In fact, I'm not a big fan of return on investment. I'm a big fan of return on engagement. So I don't think you can look at any particular learning intervention and say, well, that increased the business by 10%, because that's a very isolated event and doesn't take into account everything else that's going on in the environment. Betsy Myers just released some research just a couple of weeks ago saying 50% of the US workforce are disengaged. Half of the people in their jobs in America aren't engaged with what they do every day. So surely there must be something wrong there. No matter which organisation is showing really high ROI on their training, if there are people aren't engaged, they're not going to seek out learning. They're not going to make the connection. And this is our friendly mentor character from McCreaney. Obviously design a really kick-ass serious game, but around that we need to consider everything else that might go on. So we call that the learning ecosystem. So any assessment that you do needs to be in context of the learning. Even something like having a cardboard cutout of the alien in the corner by the water cooler, it's going to get people talking. At the end of McCreaney, you get a certificate that talks about what you did in the game. You enter the game and you don't know which alien species you are. You might assume that you're human, but at the end of it you come out as an alien. So if you get a certificate with your alien species will have 12 on your wall, and someone comes along and says, oh, you're one of those, I was one of these. It gets people talking, and if that's linked to competency or if that's linked to behaviour, then it just creates opportunities outside of the training environment, and it just keeps it going, keeps that continuous learning going. Obviously with new technology again, apps, something is the future. Almost everyone has a smartphone nowadays. Just-in-time training is really important. And as part of that blend, classroom training, face-to-face interaction and e-learning where appropriate should also be included. As a content delivery system, you have something telling you something, where it's either a lecturer telling you the subject, it's an author telling you again the content. A game doesn't tell you the content. You don't get told you need to kill 10 soldiers, climb up the ramp, go and find this object, then go and kill the boss through this mechanism. You discover that yourself by playing the game. So as a designer, yes, you get given content, you're given a lot of content, very dry content. You take the lessons that are embedded in that content and script activities around them, giving the responsibility to the learner to discover the pros and cons of their actions and consequences of their actions. So it's really a discovery process. It depends on what you're trying to teach. And we mainly focus on business soft skills. So our leadership development game, for example, has absolutely no content in it at all. You're put on an island with 3 other people, and you solve abstract puzzles, and you talk to one another, and you have dependencies between people. There's no content being delivered, but you're learning how to be a good team member by progressing through the game.